Hello. We have a guest. It's just me and him in the house today, so we're gonna hang out today, alright? So I hope you guys don't mind a bit of snorting and a bit of licking in the background. Specular highlights are one of my favorite bits of being an artist. There is something so satisfying of just adding like a bit of gloss and watching the entire face come to life. But did you know there is so much more you can do with your specular highlights and so much fun you could have? Today, once again, we're reviving an old series because apparently that's what we do these days. But today I'm going to share with you 4 very simple but very effective ways in which you can level up your specular highlights. As always, if you enjoyed this video and learned something today, then please show it some love by giving it a like, a comment, and a subscribe. And if you'd like to support this channel and grab even more exclusive content every single week, come check out my Patreon. The link is always in the video description. But now let's look at 4 simple steps to even better specular highlights. So this week I'm working on the word prompt split. Instantly, this makes me think of a disconnect, perhaps between the dark and light aspects of our own personalities. I also wanted to mention that on Patreon this week, we've looked at sketching faces and how to stylize 4 faces in the classic cute/pretty sense. So if that's something you're interested in, it did go up on Friday. But as you can see, I've got the vast majority of the painting done, and I usually keep the specular highlights for the very end because that way you're not painting over it later on. And I also want to mention that all of these tips require you to keep your specular highlights on their own layer. Trust me, it'll make life a million times easier. Alrighty, let's look at some important changes you can make to really bump up your specularity game. Now, I'm gonna warn you beforehand, some of these are so silly and obvious, you'll think it won't make a difference, but trust me, give it a shot, it will change your life. So, you know that specular highlights are these bright spots of white that push the glossiness of a surface, but have you ever considered tinting your specular highlights instead of going plain white? This works amazingly well in vibrant materials. You just want to grab a super bright pale color that is complementary to the rest of the object around it. So here, for instance, I want to place some highlights on the skin. Instead of going for a white, I'm actually going to tint the white with a bit of blue, since that is the complementary tone to orange, which is prevalent in the skin. We're going to keep it super bright still, we do want it to look like a highlight, but we've just added a tinge of color. In fact, you could really push this and narrow the pool of color that you're going to find a complement for. So instead of looking for the overall tone for the skin, I might look just for the local color right around where I want to place my highlight and choose a tone that is complementary to that. Why would you tint your highlight? The answer is simple: for vibrance. When you introduce more color across values, it really pushes the color palette. So the next time you have warm light and cool shadow, consider a cool specular highlight too. That way you're really sandwiching that warm mid-tone between the 2 cooler ends of the spectrum, which further enhances your color space instead of the usual flat tones. And of course, when you enhance color separations like that, what you're really doing is enhancing your mood and lighting setup, which is exactly what we always need. So tip number 1, try tinting your specular highlight. This is actually an excellent tip for highlights that you place in the eyes. Instead of sticking to the usual round specks, consider changing up the shape of your highlight. Experiment with squares, triangles, rings, random blobs. In the eyes, doing this almost creates a sense of environment, wherein you're indicating a bunch of different atmospheric objects that might be reflecting in the eyes, therefore suggesting that there is a whole bunch of things going on behind the camera that aren't even in the frame. It's such a subtle difference that we don't even consciously notice, but our subconscious mind uses this tiny detail to try and orient the character in a room or in general space. Same with the highlights on the lips. Try scribbles rather than your standard circle or oval. Here it has a slightly different effect. On the lips, scribbled highlights indicate texture that may lie under a layer of wetness or gloss. Almost like although the character has a glossy lip, there is still texture underneath it. You can extrapolate this and try a bunch of different shapes for the highlights in places like jewelry and hair too, and that creates a lot more texture and interest in what is otherwise smooth and flat surfaces. This is another one for skin, especially for those of you who really want to paint skin to have a little more realism. Consider using a scatter brush to create specular highlights in areas where you want to add a bit of texture to your skin. This is especially nice if you want the skin to look nice and matte, but still catch the light and have dimension. I love using this just above the bulb of the nose, around the center of the face, maybe even a little bit on the cheekbone. Actually, here's a little bonus tip because I love you and I want you to succeed. Use this textured specular highlight as a layer underneath your larger flat highlights. So keeping with the cheekbone here, put a little bit of texture underneath the main super solid highlight. This just adds a little extra texture up there so it looks like skin despite there being a lot of gloss. Another cool place you can layer this is under the highlight of the lip. It really creates a bit more texture in there. And another super cool place you can use a textured scatter brush is to add highlights in glitter. We love a good glitter moment, and a scatter brush is perfect to show how the little bits of glitter catch the light so randomly. Play with a bit of texture in your specular highlight. I promise it will add so much character to your materials. And the final thing we're going to play with here is the opacity. This is a god tier tweak that once you master will add an insane amount of detail and dimension to your specular highlights. Now that we have our specular highlights on their own layer, what we're going to do is create a transparency mask. Then we grab a black and an airbrush or any brush that has a soft edge, and we're gonna start randomly blurring out some edges by erasing them. If you've never used layer mask before, think of it as a more forgiving eraser tool. Anything you paint black in a mask disappears, but if you've erased too much, you can always paint it back in with white and it comes right back. So it's kind of like using masking fluid, but after you've painted. I love to mask off the edges of some of the bigger specular highlights because it really adds the one missing ingredient, that is depth. Having a highlight that fades off into the edges makes you think that the surface that is catching the light must be rounded or have a third dimension that is kind of receding away from the light source. This is an excellent trick to use in the specular highlights of the eye because it pushes the roundness of that sclera. It's also a great one for highlights on the nose bulb or top of the cheekbone for this exact reason. Plus, if you feel like the texture we added in step 3 was a bit much or looks too flat, you can always gently airbrush the outermost scatter, and that will give you a more subtle texture that kind of fades into nothingness. Finally, I fatten all of the specular highlights into a single layer, and there is our final painting. You can see the difference when I turn the highlights on and off, it just instantly makes the painting come alive. So there you go. I hope this video has helped you guys maybe give some extra thought to the more subtle aspects of color and lighting. Which of these tips do you already use, and which ones will you be using from this day forward? Let me know in a comment below because I'm really curious to hear what you think. As always, if you enjoyed this video and learned something today, then please do let me know by giving it a big thumbs up and hitting that subscribe button below. And if you'd like to grab even more exclusive content, one extra tutorial every single week, come check out my page Patreon. The link to that is in the video description. Also, come say hi on Instagram and Discord because I really love hearing from you guys, so links to that are also in the video description below. With all of that said, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Check out some more videos up here and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye!